When Jasmine Crockett linked Trump's circle to secret shell companies and buried cash trails, it wasn't just political drama, it was the kind of truth people try to erase. Nobody expected the segment to go off script. Not like that. It was supposed to be a standard Friday panel on MSNBC. 4 guests, 1 anchor, 30 minutes of political posturing. Viewers knew the routine, but Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to play along. She sat in the second chair from the left, black tailored blazer, simple gold studs in her ears, and a folder clutched under her arm, like it held something alive. The host Clint Brower kicked off the segment with polite banter about ethics investigations piling up in D.C. Crockett, waited nodding while others spoke, but when Clint turned to her, she didn't hesitate. Before we pretend this is all just about Hunter Biden or some random ethics review, she said, maybe we need to talk about the emails no one wants to touch that silenced the table. Clint blinked. Congresswoman, what emails are you referring to? She placed the folder on the table, opened it, and slid out a printed document, 3 pages, double-spaced, highlighter markings, all over these, from an anonymous source, internal communications between a Trump associate and a finance firm based out of Mesa, Arizona. They mentioned routing legal funds through a shell company to cover campaign-related costs. One panelist coughed awkwardly, another looked off camera. Clint tried to intervene. Just to be clear, we haven't seen or verified. Crockett raised her voice slightly, not angry, just firm. I didn't come here to be polite. I came here because people are playing dumb while bending the rules in broad daylight. The name of that shell company, Firefly Atlantic Holdings. And it didn't exist until 3 months before the last election. Now it's gone. Social media was already spinning by the time the show cut to commercial viewers. Clipped the segment, posted it to X, to TikTok, to Instagram, with captions like Jasmine drops the receipts and she named names. Trump's office issued a statement within 30 minutes. Jasmine Crockett is a reckless liar who will say anything for attention. Her time in Congress has been marked by chaos, not credibility. These so-called emails are fabricated trash. She should apologize immediately, but Crockett wasn't apologizing. She was getting ready for interviews back in the green room. Her aide, Dion Frazier, handed her a phone. It's already everywhere. You might want to see this. Crockett scrolled past the trending topics. Her name, Trump's response, a photo freeze frame of her holding the paper. One clip had already passed, 400,000 views. Then came the calls, CNN, NBC, even BBC America. But the moment that really set things off was a grainy clip, posted by someone who claimed to work in the Mesa finance office. In it, 2 men are seen walking through a hallway with a document labeled Firefly Legal Bundles Q3. The file name alone was enough to light the match, but it wasn't just about the content. It was Crockett's delivery, the calm defiance, the fact that she didn't stumble, didn't hedge. People weren't used to seeing politicians take that kind of risk. Live, and without a safety net. Still not. Everyone was impressed. Right-wing commentator Lyle Brenner called her a theater kid with a grudge and said it was dangerous to let elected officials weaponize rumors. But something about her conviction about the paper in her hand and the way she stared straight into the camera when she said, "I'm not scared of his Twitter account or whatever it is," now that stuck. But Crockett had stirred something too big to contain, and it wouldn't take long before things got personal. By the time Jasmine Crockett stepped out of the MSNBC building in Midtown Manhattan, she was already a headline. Her phone wouldn't stop vibrating. Notifications from staff reporters, even old college classmates she hadn't spoken to in years. She didn't check most of them. She just got into the black SUV, leaned her head back, and exhaled. Jazz. Dion said quietly, riding shotgun, "You just poked the biggest bear in American politics." "You good?" Crockett didn't answer right away. She looked out the window. If he was really as tough as he pretends to be, he'd show up in court instead of raging online. Back at Trump's Florida estate, things weren't calm either. Inside the West Wing of Mar-a-Lago, 2 aides scrolled through clips of Crockett's appearance, pausing and replaying her words. Firefly Atlantic Holdings. One mumbled, "How the hell does she know that name?" The other didn't reply. He just pulled out his phone and started dialing. Meanwhile, Trump had already taken to Truth, social blasting Crockett by name in 3 back-to-back posts, each one more explosive than the last. "She's a fraud. No one ever heard of this company until she made it up. I've never heard of Firefly anything." This is another hoax. The all-caps rant had its intended effect. His followers immediately pounced within an hour. Crockett's email inbox was flooded with threats. Her campaign website was hit with a coordinated bot attack, and trolls flooded her Instagram comments with snake emojis and conspiracy theories. But Crockett wasn't new to push back. She knew what was real and what was noise. Still, she couldn't ignore the intensity. That night, she sat in her apartment in Dallas, face lit by the soft glow of her laptop screen. Her mother called twice. She didn't pick up. Not yet. Instead, she watched a clip from the panel again, this time focusing on the faces around her, the way the others shifted in their chairs, the moment Clint Brawler's eyebrows twitched just slightly. That's when she knew she hadn't just touched a nerve, she'd hit something buried on Capitol Hill. Democrats scrambled a few, quietly praised her boldness in text threads, while others worried she'd gone too far too fast. One longtime senator from Oregon called her staff directly. She needs to walk it back a little. He said, "There's no political cover if this thing turns out to be fluff." But Crockett didn't walk anything back the next morning. She went on CNN's State of the Union and doubled down. "If you don't want the truth on live TV," she told host Kristen Dillard, "don't invite me. I'm not here for sound bites. I'm here to ask why a company with no employees, no website, and no paper trail was sending six-figure payments to attorneys handling election lawsuits." Kristen leaned in. "You're accusing the former president of laundering legal expenses through a shell company. I'm saying someone needs to investigate. I don't care what party they're from by noon." Hashtags like #CrockettVs, Trump, and #Firefly emails were trending. Protesters appeared outside her Dallas office, half in support, half waving MAGA flags, and demanding she resign. One man even tried to shove a handwritten subpoena through the glass door, yelling, "You're done. You messed with the wrong man." But the scene that really shook her came at a gas station in Mesquite, just east of Dallas. Crockett had insisted on stopping for her own coffee. No aides, no cameras. She just wanted 10 minutes to breathe. As she walked to her car, an older black woman in a navy windbreaker approached. She didn't say much, just placed her hand on Crockett's arm and said, "Don't let them scare you, quiet." It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't theatrical, but it was human. Crockett felt it in her chest. "Back in the SUV, Dion glanced over you." "Okay." Crockett stared at her coffee for a second. "I'm not scared of them, I just hate that they think they're untouchable." But while Crockett was standing firm, someone else was quietly digging, and what they'd find next would put the whole Firefly situation on a new level. Monday morning came heavy, no sunlight creeping through the blinds, just the thud of early emails and the weight of too many eyes watching. Jasmine Crockett arrived at her Dallas office, wearing sweats and a ball cap. An intentional move. She wasn't there to be seen. She was there to start asking questions of her own. The office was quiet when she walked in. Dion had already laid out a printed copy of the emails now, with notes scribbled along the margins, in red pen next to it, a post-it with just one word. Mesa Crockett didn't sit. She stood over the desk, flipping through the pages again. The emails weren't long, but they were specific, just enough to raise flags without offering anything conclusive. Phrases like "transfer complete" and "Firefly needs the second invoice to reflect consulting, not legal" stood out. One email mentioned a date, October 14th, 2020. Another listed a contact name, Drew Bellamy. Who the hell is Bellamy? Crockett muttered. Dion walked in, holding a steaming mug. "We ran a background check. He's not in any government database, but there's a LinkedIn profile tied to that name out of Phoenix. Lists him as private finance consultant. No employer, no clear history before 2019. That's thin enough to be real." They sat in silence for a moment, just listening to the AC rattle overhead. Then Dion opened her laptop and pulled up a spreadsheet. "We also traced the wire transactions mentioned in the metadata. They LED us to a bank in Wichita Falls. The company name used there, Saffron Dynamics." Crockett blinked. That's not the name from the email exactly. Firefly disappears after 2020, but Saffron shows up in 2021, moving similar amounts through similar channels to some of the same law firms. It was a pattern, not proof, but a start. But what really hit her gut was the email signature on the final message. The initials RJ stood alone. No full name, no title, just the kind of thing someone sends when they don't expect to be questioned. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in months. It rang 4 times before someone answered. "Drew." A pause. "Then who's this?" "You already know. I need to talk to you off the record." Click. That was all. No goodbye, no refusal. Just the line going dead. Back at her DC apartment that night, Crockett opened her private inbox, one she kept away from staff, and found a new message. No subject line, no sender name. Just an attachment and one sentence. You're not supposed to see this. She didn't open it right away. She stared at the screen for a full minute, then shut the laptop the next morning. Dion pressed her. You're being watched now, Jazz. Whatever you do, make sure you're not alone with this stuff. I never expected to be alone. No, I mean, really alone. Later that afternoon, Crockett held a quiet call with two members of the House Oversight Committee. She wanted to know if any previous complaints had been filed involving Firefly Atlantic Holdings, Saffron Dynamics, or Drew Bellamy. Neither member could confirm, but one of them did say this. There's been talk, Jasmine, not about names, about people moving money for things they don't want recorded. If you poke too deep, you better be ready for what comes up that night. While she tried to sleep, a voicemail came through. No caller ID, just a man's voice, calm and deliberate. You don't know who you're messing with. Stay in your lane. She played it twice, let it sit in the silence of the room, but staying in her lane had never been her strength, and someone had just made it personal. The parking lot behind the old train museum in Arlington was half empty, its cracked pavement lined with fading yellow stripes and a few wind-blown leaves. It was just after 6 in the evening. The sun hung low behind a bank of clouds, the air heavy with late spring humidity. Jasmine Crockett stood with her hands in her pockets, her eyes scanning every car that pulled in a dark gray sedan, circled the lot twice before easing into a space across from her, the driver's window lowered. Halfway. You alone? The man asked. She gave a small nod. You Drew? He stepped out cautiously, jeans, hoodie, sunglasses. Even though the light was fading, he looked around before walking toward her up close. He was younger than she expected, maybe late 30s, not polished, but not careless, either. You said no press, he said quietly. No press, no recording, just answers. He handed her a flash drive. Everything I saved, before they told me to delete it. Files, meeting notes, contact lists. I don't know what you're looking for, but this is what I've got. Crockett took it, but didn't move. Why now? Because I don't like being used. And because Firefly was never supposed to be permanent. It was a burner one job. Then vanish, you were part of that. He exhaled hard. I didn't know the whole game. At first, they told me it was consulting for campaign security, nothing illegal. But once I saw the names on the invoices, attorneys who weren't even licensed in Texas payments, labeled as equipment rentals for locations that don't exist, he trailed off, and the initials R.J. Drew glanced away. Can't say that's the one line I won't cross. Crockett narrowed her eyes. Then why even show up? Because you're the first one crazy enough to say it out loud on TV. There was a moment of silence between them, just the distant hum of traffic and a dog barking somewhere behind the fence line. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small notepad. Saffron Dynamics. You know that name. He flinched just barely. Yeah, Firefly's ghost. They started folding Firefly's assets into it after the election. You're not wrong to link them and who runs it. He looked down. Same people, just under a different LLC in Nevada. She scribbled that down, flipping the notepad. Shut. Can I ask you something? Drew said, go ahead. Why are you doing this? When most of them either play it safe or play pretend. She looked at him tired and serious. Because if I don't, they win twice. That sat heavy in the air. Drew took a step back. Don't try to contact me again. I won't respond. And I don't want protection. I just want out. He turned, climbed back into his car, and drove off without another word. Crockett stood there for another few minutes, fingers tight around the flash drive. She didn't have all the answers, but she had more than before. Back in her car, she locked the doors and plugged the drive into a secure laptop. Folders opened one by one, labeled transactions, names. She recognized some in law, some in real estate, a few in campaign finance. There was even a memo with a subject line that read, election compliance work around structure, do not distribute. It wasn't hard proof, but it was smoke enough to lead to fire. When she got back to her Dallas apartment that night, she sent a single email to a contact at ProPublica. The subject line read, we need to talk off. Record. Dion called her 5 minutes later. You all right? Yeah, you get anything? Yeah. A pause. You're not sleeping tonight, are you? Crockett smiled, faintly, didn't plan on it, but while she was connecting the dots, others were working just as fast to make sure those dots never became a picture. By Wednesday, the noise had turned into a storm, not just from the media, though they were circling like hawks, but from inside Jasmine Crockett's own camp. What started as whispers about strategic risk turned into blunt concerns from fellow House Democrats. One congressman from Pennsylvania had the nerve to say it outright, on a group call, "You're not a prosecutor." "Jasmine, we already have committees for this." She didn't flinch, and what have those committees done? Exactly hold hearings. No one watches and let people skate the line? Went silent, but outside her circle, people were very much watching. The MSNBC clip had now crossed 3 million views. Every political podcast worth its salt had dedicated an emergency episode to the Firefly Files. And now, the questions weren't just coming from voters, they were coming from federal journalists, watchdog groups, and anonymous Reddit users who were digging deep into LLC registries and campaign filings. Still, the pressure wasn't just public. It was emotional inside her district office in Dallas. Crockett sat across from Dion with the flash drive plugged into her laptop. "This isn't just money moving around," Dion said, tapping her fingers nervously. "Some of these names, they're connected to real contracts. That one there, Gerald Clint, he got a no-bid state contract for election technology. 2 months after a payment from Saffron is he on the donor list twice, once under his name, once under a pact, tied to a small charter school in Lubbock. Jasmine stared at the screen, her jaw locked, so they're hiding donations under school funding. Now looks that way, outside the faint sound of protest chants filtered in through the windows. It had become a daily occurrence. Supporters holding signs with her face on them stood side by side with Trump loyalists, waving flags and yelling about fake news. The police were bored with it, already standing around just waiting for a reason to step in. The phone on her desk buzzed. She answered, expecting another news request. Instead, it was a voice she recognized from Capitol Hill, Senator Lauren Banner, one of the more careful, calculated Democrats in the Senate. "I'm not calling to scold you," she began. "I just need to know, is it real?" Crockett paused. "Yeah, it's real, just not all of it yet." Banner's voice dropped. "Then be smart. You don't have to drop the hammer all at once. Build it, back it up. Don't give them an inch to discredit you." That was the thing Crocker wasn't trying to destroy. Trump with a single move. She wanted transparency, not theater, but people were already choosing sides in the press, on the floor of the House, even in her own office. One of her junior aides, Kira, spoke up late that night, when only 3 of them were still working. "I'm just going to say it," Kira said. "What happens if this takes you down instead? They'll call it political sabotage. You know that, right?" Jasmine looked up from her screen. "Yeah," and Kira hesitated. "Just be sure you're ready for what happens when they don't come for you with words anymore." There was no fear in her face, just honesty, the kind of concern that comes from respect, not doubt. That night, Crockett slept for 3 hours, woke up at 4:15 a.m., and stared at her ceiling until the sun came through the blinds. By morning, the New York Times ran a piece titled "Crockett's Claims." Gain traction is the Firefly Trail. Real in it, they referenced the ProPublica request and quoted an unnamed source, close to an active federal campaign finance inquiry. No denials, just quiet movement. Then came the email. It wasn't from Drew. It wasn't even signed, but it had one attachment. An invoice labeled Litigation Transport Package, Palm Beach, dated October 19th, 2020. The vendor, Saffron Dynamics. Amount $97,200. Crockett called Dion in from the hallway. "This isn't over," she said. Dion shook her head. "No, it's starting." But while Crockett prepared for the next step, forces were already gathering to discredit everything she'd touched. The hallway outside the Oversight Committee chamber in D.C. smelled faintly of stale coffee and tension that morning. Jasmine Crockett walked in, early folder tucked beneath her arm heels, echoing with sharp intent. Every reporter in the corridor turned as she passed. Half of them held out microphones. The other half just stared. She didn't stop inside the chamber. Some of her colleagues barely met her eyes. Others gave small nods. Tight-lipped, careful, the kind of silent acknowledgement that meant, "We see you, but we're not getting dragged into this." The session wasn't about Firefly, not officially, but the shift in tone was undeniable. When Representative Coleman Greer, a longtime Trump ally from Oklahoma, finally spoke up, he didn't bother with niceties. "Before we move on," Greer said with a theatrical sigh, "I'd like to request an ethics review into the conduct of Congresswoman Crockett. Specifically, her use of unverified materials to level accusations against the former president and current federal figures. It's reckless, politically motivated, and damages the integrity of this institution. Crockett didn't flinch. She raised her mic. Mr. Greer, would you care to disclose how many contributions your campaign received from the same firms tied to Saffron Dynamics? He shifted in his seat. That's not the question. No, it's the question. You're afraid of. Murmurs rippled through the room. The chair banged the gavel. Once we'll maintain order, or we'll recess outside the chamber. The scene was worse. Protesters had moved from Dallas to D.C. and organized waves. Crocker's staff received a bomb threat that morning, forcing them to sweep her Hill office twice. Her communications director, Rashad, barely slept. They're coordinating this jazz. Not just trolls. We've tracked 4 different far-right blogs, posting your personal schedule, somebody's feeding them info, and we're still not backing down. No, Rashad said, but maybe we adjust the route to your apartment. Meanwhile, a group of moderate Democrats held an off-the-record meeting that afternoon. The topic, whether Crockett's public stance was distracting from the broader midterm messaging, one aide leaked the meeting summary to a journalist at Axios. Within 2 hours, Crockett read the piece in a Chipotle parking lot while scarfing down a burrito between interviews. So, now I'm a messaging problem, she said to Dion, half laughing, half exhausted. You're a threat, that's not the same thing. Still not. Everyone was running scared. 2 freshman representatives from Minnesota and New Mexico approached her later that day with quiet encouragement and questions of their own. Do you think there's enough to open a real investigation? One asked, depends who's asking. The DOJ won't move unless it's undeniable, and if it is, then things get very loud. Very fast, that evening, CNN ran an exclusive. They'd obtained parts of a Homeland Security memo referencing a sudden uptick in anonymous shell corporations tied to campaign consulting payments during the third quarter of 2020. The timing lined up almost perfectly with what Crockett had exposed by 8 p.m. She was back on MSNBC this time, remote, seated in her apartment, a bookshelf behind her eyes. Sharp, they tried to shame me into silence. She said to the host, they said I was dangerous. But what's dangerous is pretending not to notice money laundering because it comes with a red tie and a familiar slogan. The host paused. You've become a lightning rod, Congresswoman. I'd rather be a lightning rod than a rubber stamp. The next morning, her office was hit with a second wave of online harassment phone calls, voicemails with slurs. A fake Twitter account under her name posted doctored quotes. Crockett didn't even blink. She just showed up to work in a white blouse and gray slacks. Calm as ever, I don't scare easy. She told her staff, not when the truth's on our side. But even as her allies grew louder, someone close to the money was about to disappear, and it would force her to act faster than she planned. The call came in just after 9 a.m. Dion picked up half, expecting another media request. Instead, it was a clipped voice from the legal team, Drew Bellamy's off the grid. Well, what do you mean off the grid? He missed a deposition scheduled this morning. His phone's been off for 16 hours. No response to messages. We sent someone to his apartment in Scottsdale. Lights off mailbox. Full car gone. Dion hung up, walked straight into Jasmine Crockett's office, and closed the door behind her. He's gone. Crockett looked up slowly. You sure as it gets? They sat in silence for a beat. Could be scared. Dion offered. Could be told to vanish. Crockett said flatly. There was no time to process. Jasmine was due on the House floor in 20 minutes, and the pressure hadn't eased. Her inbox was loaded with new requests, demands, threats. But Bellamy's disappearance shifted everything. He was the only person who had confirmed knowledge of the Firefly to Saffron switch. Without him, everything she'd built sat on thinner ice. She walked the hall toward the floor, trying to push the noise out of her head, but then out of nowhere, a voice called out low and familiar. Jasmine. She turned. It was Roselle Hayworth. Hayworth wasn't just any Democrat, she was one of the party's top donors, a Houston oil heiress turned education philanthropist. More importantly, she'd served as a financial advisor to a previous presidential campaign and had deep ties to PACs on both sides of the aisle. What are you doing here? Crockett asked. Wanted to talk, but not here. Jasmine hesitated, then nodded. They ducked into a side hallway away from reporters. Hayworth didn't bother with small talk. You're walking a thin wire. I know. Hayworth looked at her serious. No, I don't think you do that invoice from Palm Beach. You found that wasn't a one-off. It was. A test run for what? For scaling? They were experimenting with how much legal cash they could push through outside counsel without triggering FEC scrutiny if you have more. Like that I do. Hayworth took a breath, then you're holding something bigger than a story. Crockett's pulse quickened. You knew about this. I heard whispers people I fundraised with, suddenly cutting deals with firms I've never seen on a ballot. It didn't feel right, and you didn't say anything. I wasn't sure until you went public now. It's out, but you have to be careful, Jasmine. These aren't just political operatives. Some of these people have money tied up in defense contracts. Real power. Jasmine squared her shoulders. If you're trying to scare me, you're wasting time. Hayworth half smiled. I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to offer options. Quiet options. You let this go. Walk it back. Just a little. Doors stay open for you. Leadership tracks. Endorsements. Money. Crockett stared at her. And if I don't, then I hope you're comfortable walking alone. A long pause, then Crockett said quietly, I'd rather walk alone with my spine straight than crowded in with cowards. Hayworth looked at her for a long moment, then walked away without another word. Later that evening, Crockett sat with Rashad and Dion in the back room of a private office near K Street. No suits, no filters, just the three of them, eyes red from long days and longer nights. So Bellamy's gone, and Hayworth just tried to bribe you with a smile. Rashad said, What now? Crockett leaned forward. Now, we talked to the committee, not to ask permission to make it official. You sure they'll back you? No, but I'm not asking them to. She slid the flash drive across the table. We hand over everything. If they bury it, we leak it, but either way, they can't say they didn't know. Rashad shook his head. You're throwing a match into a dry field. Crockett gave a tired smile. Good, maybe something needs to burn, but before they could take that next step, someone unexpected would reach out, and it would change everything they thought they knew. 3 days after Drew Bellamy vanished, Jasmine Crockett received a letter, not an email, not a DM, a physical letter, hand-delivered to her DC office, in a plain white envelope with no return address. Inside was a single page, typed unsigned. It read, I was in the room. Firefly wasn't the only shell. There were 6 check filings in Wyoming under the name East Point Collective. They rerouted donations through that and sent the clean cash back through media buys. You've only scratched the surface. Be careful, there was no signature, no way to confirm its source. But Crockett didn't need much convincing. She handed the note to Dion and immediately picked up her phone. Get the research team on this every East Point Collective transaction from Q2 and Q3 of 2020. I want timelines. I want vendor names within the hour. Her staff had found 3 payments, small but curious, all from East Point Collective LLC to 2 regional media agencies and 1 logistics firm in Plano, Texas. None of the companies had any political clients listed on their public records. Crockett looked at the figures, $32,011,500 and $47,800, all of them just under thresholds that would typically trigger mandatory FEC reporting. They kept everything beneath radar. Dion said if you weren't looking for it, you'd never notice. Except now, we are. Crockett said the next day she called a quiet meeting with Representative Kelly Gerardo, a soft-spoken ethics wonk from Oregon who had once clerked for a campaign finance investigation. Gerardo listened carefully as Crockett laid out what she had. She didn't exaggerate, didn't overreach. She showed her the raw data, the timelines, the matching gaps, and filings. When Crockett finished, Gerardo sat back in her chair and asked one question. You ready for this to go all the way? Crockett didn't blink. I didn't come here to manage chaos. I came here to expose it by week's end. Gerardo had brought in a small circle of House members willing to quietly review the evidence. Among them was Emmett De La Rosa from San Diego, a former prosecutor who'd taken on white-collar crime before politics. He didn't say much, but when he finished flipping through the folders, he nodded once and said, This is how they did it. The committee staffers requested digital copies of the drive Crockett's legal team advised caution. They're not your allies, her lead attorney warned their temporary passengers. Keep a copy. Keep the originals off-site that night. Crockett flew back to Dallas. She didn't alert the press. No speech, no sound bite, just a quiet dinner with her parents, both of whom had been following the story with equal parts pride and anxiety. Her father asked the question she'd been dreading. You sure you want this fight? Crockett didn't hesitate. They're laundering democracy. Someone's got to say it. She flew back the next morning alone in the window seat. When she landed, she had 3 new voicemails. 2 from reporters and 1 from an unfamiliar number. She listened to the third one. Twice the voice was male, calm, older, faint trace of a northeastern accent. "You don't know me, but I'm close to someone who's very worried about what's coming. Not because you're wrong, but because if you're right, it means everything's been broken a lot longer than we thought. You're not just looking at Trump, you're looking at a system that fed him. Be careful who you trust." The message ended there. She saved it, then forwarded it to Dion. Later that day, Crockett stood behind a podium outside the Capitol Press. Cameras lined up mics aimed straight at her. "I've handed over everything I have to the Oversight Committee," she said. "I trust the process. What's left of it. But let me be clear, if this evidence disappears, I won't." A reporter called out, "Are you accusing Congress of corruption?" I'm saying, sunlight doesn't scare me, but it terrifies some of the people behind those checks. It was firm. It was clean. No, theatrics back inside, she received a text from Gerardo. "Check your inbox, it's happening." She opened her email there. It was subject request to open preliminary review. Firefly and East Point contributions. It was real now, documented, tracked. But while Crockett finally had the system's attention, the reaction from the public would be something else entirely, and not all of it would come from strangers. By the end of the week, Jasmine Crockett's name was everywhere. Morning talk shows, late-night monologues, political blogs, and fringe podcasts. Some called her brave, others called her reckless. And then there were the ones who said nothing at all, just reposted her clips with fire emojis or snake gifs, depending on which side of the fence they stood on. It was polarizing, predictable. But there was something else now, a current beneath the chaos. People were listening. Not everyone liked what they were hearing one morning. Crockett stepped outside her apartment in D.C. and found a hand-scrawled note taped to her windshield. "Keep talking. We're closer than you think. No name, no symbol, just black marker on a torn piece of printer paper." She didn't flinch. She folded it up, handed it to Dion, and kept moving. That same afternoon, a woman in her 60s walked up to Crockett at a Georgetown coffee shop. She had a tremble in her voice, but she was steady on her feet. "I watched your interview last night." She said, "I worked on a Senate campaign in '84. Back then they hid things in briefcases and shredded paper. Now they hide it in code, and shell companies keep going. You're not wrong." Crockett thanked her and sat quietly for a few minutes afterwards, stirring her coffee, but not drinking it back on the Hill. Her staff was juggling incoming calls from state offices, law clinics, retired prosecutors, even 2 whistleblowers from unrelated campaigns who wanted to compare notes. Suddenly people who had nothing to gain were stepping forward, but not all the attention came with good intentions. That Friday, Rashad pulled her aside and showed her a news alert on his phone. A far-right influencer, based out of West Virginia, had just published a video claiming he had proof Crockett's team had doctored the Firefly emails. He didn't show the proof. Of course, just wild allegations and blurry screenshots that's going to spread. Rashad said it's nonsense, but it doesn't matter. Crockett didn't even look at the screen. Let them bark. We've got paper. We've got witnesses. They've got YouTube still. The threats got worse. A digital security firm monitoring Crockett's online footprint flagged a discussion thread where users talked about tracking her schedule and paying her a visit. They recommended reducing her public exposure for the next 72 hours, but Crockett refused to disappear. She scheduled a town hall in Fort Worth the following weekend. No virtual stream, no closed doors, just folding chairs, a handheld mic, and about 130 people who showed up even in the pouring rain. She stood at the front of a community center gym and spoke for nearly an hour about money and politics, about how elections are funded, and about the parts of the system people are trained not to look at. Then during the Q&A, a young man stood up, maybe mid-20s, hoodie jeans, nervous energy. "My uncle was on a legal team tied to one of those firms you mentioned. He said he told us not to talk to anyone, not even family, said it was just consulting paperwork. But I looked into the addresses. One was a shipping warehouse, the other was a house that's been empty for years." The room went quiet. Crockett didn't push him. She didn't ask for more. She just said, "That's why we're here, to stop pretending we don't see what's in front of us." Later that evening, as the rain lightened, Crockett stepped outside the center. A black sedan was parked across the street, not uncommon, but something about it felt wrong. It pulled off the second she turned her head toward it. Dion caught up to her a few seconds later. "We've got another tip. Someone wants to talk, says they worked with Firefly's legal team during the 2020 transition. Crockett gave a tired smile. Let's hear it. Wants to meet in Alexandria tomorrow, says he's got documents but only wants to hand them off in person. She exhaled. Let's go, but the meeting in Alexandria wouldn't go as planned. And what Crockett would learn next wasn't just about Trump. It was about the system that let him happen. They met in a quiet alley behind a bookstore in Alexandria, Virginia, just before sunset. Crockett wore a black coat and kept her hair pulled back. Dion waited nearby, leaning against a rental car with one hand tucked into her jacket pocket. The man appeared exactly at 6:07 p.m., early 40s, plainclothes wire-rimmed glasses. He walked fast, kept his head down, and carried a manila envelope tight against his chest, like it could disappear if he let go. Miss Crockett, he said, glancing over his shoulder, you have 5 minutes. She didn't waste time. What are you bringing me? Internal memos, legal strategies, notes from conference calls. Most of them aren't about Trump directly, but they show the machinery packs working in coordination with consultants that don't actually consult. They run money in a circle. The names on the checks change, but the hands behind them stay the same. She looked through the envelope. Handwritten notes, digital printouts with metadata. One particularly bold section read, Legal Defense. Funds must maintain at least 2 degrees of separation from campaign operations. A footnote added use, trusted firm intermediaries. These were shared with Firefly. He nodded, and Saffron and East Point. They're all chapters in the same book, and the authors. He gave a small, sad smile, mostly lawyers, who found the right loopholes, 1 or 2 lobbyists. The rest, they just looked the other way. Crockett paused. Why now? Because someone finally said it out loud. He turned to leave. You ever testify? She called after him. Never wanted to. Still don't. Then he disappeared around the corner that night. Crockett sat alone in her apartment, the paper spread across the table. She didn't touch her phone. She didn't talk to the press for a full hour. She just read, highlighted, wrote notes in the margins. Her pen never stopped moving. The story had started with Trump, the name everyone already knew, the chaos people had grown numb to. But now she saw the full scale. This wasn't just about one man. It was about all the people who helped make the noise feel normal. She thought about that young man at the town hall, about the woman in the coffee shop, the note on her windshield, and for the first time in weeks, she felt something settle deep in her chest. Not peace exactly, but clarity. The next morning, she held a press conference. No podium this time, no flag backdrop, just her standing in front of a group of reporters under the gray sky. I came to Congress to legislate, but lately I've spent more time exposing than voting. And I've realized something. The systems we trust to keep power in check are too polite to confront it. They'll study it, file it, analyze it, but rarely act on it. Well, I'm not built for polite silence. What I've found isn't just about one candidate or one company. It's about how easy it's become to manipulate money and influence without consequence. And the worst part, we trained ourselves to look away. I won't be part of that one. Reporter called out, "Are you planning to push for formal hearings?" Crockett nodded yes, and not behind closed doors. The coverage came quickly. National outlets, independent media, foreign news agencies, some called it a political gamble, others called it a moral stand. But the most unexpected call came that night from someone connected to the Trump orbit, not a loyalist, not a talking head. Someone whose name had appeared briefly in one of the memos from the man in Alexandria. She answered on the 3rd ring. I saw the conference, the voice said. If you want to know who tied Firefly and East Point together, look at the 2019 GOP retreat in San Diego. There's a photo. One man is in both circles. He ties it all together. Name a pause. You'll know when you see it click that night. Crockett looked up photos from the retreat, scrolled through, until she found it. A group shot of donors and strategists at a golf course. And there he was, smiling in the background, sunglasses in hand. She'd seen his name before, never connected him to anything major, just a quiet donor. Until now, she circled his face, scribbled his name on a notepad. Then she leaned back in her chair, looked at the ceiling, and whispered to herself, "No more silence." Sometimes speaking up doesn't fix the system, but it exposes who's been comfortable in the dark. That's where real change starts, not in the spotlight, but in what you force people to see, if you believe truth should still matter. Subscribe because we're not finished.